To truly understand the shadow Buck Compton cast across the frozen hell of Bastogne, you have to bypass the polished lens of television and go straight to the man himself. History, as it turns out, is often written by those with the loudest voices, and a lingering friction between Buck and his superiors, Dick Winters and Lewis Nixon, meant the version the world saw was often colored by old animosities. Buck's reality on January 10, 1945, was far more nuanced than a simple mental collapse. The whispers of his instability actually began months earlier in the mud of Holland. On a sharp September day in 1944, a German bullet found its mark outside Nieuwegein. Buck didn't fall with a cinematic flourish. Instead, he was patched up by Eugene Rowe and hoisted onto the hood of a British Jeep like a piece of salvaged cargo. As the Jeep bounced down the road, his own men couldn't resist a bit of dark infantry humor, chirping at the sight of their officer with his backside skyward. Buck simply gritted his teeth against the pain and the jokes, his mind already spiraling with the guilt of leaving his platoon without an assistant officer to guide them. His journey through the medical system was a slog of crowded wards and stinging needles. At a British hospital in Eindhoven, he found the tetanus shot more agonizing than the bullet that had pierced him. He was a man caught in a silent tug of war. Part of him yearned for the safety of home, yet he knew his 4 holes from one bullet wound wasn't his ticket out. After a surgeon in Brussels extracted the .30 caliber slug, Buck awoke to the surreal irony of finding a college buddy from UCLA in the very next cot. A brief, golden autumn followed in Oxford, filled with the rare luxuries of decent food and the company of kind nurses. Before the war pulled him back, he reunited with easy company at Mourmelon-le-Grand, just as the Holland campaign closed. A deceptive peace hung in the air. The men truly believed the German lion was toothless, and the end was near. Buck, ever the athlete, threw himself into coaching a regimental football game scheduled for Christmas Day. He had his squad humming like a precision engine until December 18th, when a sudden order silenced the practice field. The 1,000-yard stare the series depicted him having during a movie night was, in Buck's words, pure fiction. He never even watched films on base. He wasn't cracking, he was preparing for the storm. Then came Bastogne. The 101st Airborne was thrown into a white wasteland, surrounded and shivering as the temperature plummeted. In the foxholes north of the town, the silence was broken only by the haunting crump of distant shells. While the series placed Buck on the line showing photos of a girlfriend named Jerry Starr, the truth was far colder. Jerry had broken his heart 6 months prior in England. He wasn't daydreaming of her in the snow. Even the enemy seemed a strange ghost of its former self. The first prisoners his platoon took were Navy and Luftwaffe sailors, men who looked as out of place in a frozen trench as fish on dry land. As the new year turned, the tension became a physical weight. On his 23rd birthday, Buck sat in a hole in the ground, feeling the isolation that Dick Winters claimed paratroopers were meant to feel. But the true breaking point wasn't a slow fraying of nerves, it was a hammer blow. On January 3rd, the sky fell. The Germans unleashed a barrage of such ferocity that the very trees turned into lethal shrapnel. Buck was the first out of his hole, screaming for a medic as his friends were torn apart. The series shows him dropping his helmet and wandering off in a daze, but Buck remembered it differently. He saw Joe Toye's leg severed and Bill Gournier shattered. He wasn't shell-shocked, he was furious and desperate. When he couldn't find the elusive Lieutenant Norman Dyke to call for help, Buck's rage boiled over. He didn't walk off the line in a trance, he ran to the command post to find a leader who wasn't there. He hated that men like Dyke, who had connections to the high brass, were in charge while veteran officers were sidelined. Eventually, the adrenaline faded, leaving only the raw grief of seeing his friends mangled. He did sit on a fallen tree, and he did cry, but they were tears of fury and sorrow, not the whimpering of a broken mind. When he finally reported to Colonel Sink at Regimental HQ, the colonel looked at the exhausted officer and saw a man who had given enough. Despite Buck's protests that he was fine, Sink stood firm. "I think you need a rest," the colonel insisted. And just like that, for Buck Compton, the screaming of the shells was replaced by the heavy, complicated silence of the aftermath.